Welcome to Around the Empire, the show that takes you around the U.S. Empire. I'm your host, Dan Wright.
And I'm your host, Joanne Leon.
And on today's show, August 11th, 2017, we speak with American author and investigative journalist Ken Silverstein about power and influence peddling in Washington and the role of think tanks, NGOs, and the media. Ken is a DC-based investigative journalist and creator of WashingtonBabylon.com, as well as a contributing writer to Vice and a columnist for the New York Observer. His stated goal for Washington Babylon was, quote, to cover DC politicians and journalists like Hollywood celebrities, not the way they are worshipped by our current media masters. He also wrote for Harpers Magazine, AP, and the Los Angeles Times. Here is that interview. Okay, on today's show, we have veteran journalist Ken Silverstein. Ken, how are you?
I'm well. How are you? Thank you.
Now, one of the things that we wanted to talk to you about, and I think one of the things people who listen to the show, particularly internationally, may not have a grasp on is how influence peddling in D.C. works. And you've covered that for a long time. One of my favorite columns of all time was Washington Babylon over at Harper's. You wrote for Salon. You wrote, as well as the think tank. So I guess quick breakdown from me, and then have you do an overview, is that people in the United States Capitol are allowed, for foreign governments, are allowed to lobby. They pay people who are their lobbyists, and they have to register under something called the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And now who they talk to or who they do business with, their level of compensation can get a little shady. And in some cases, the foreign agent will be speaking with and compensating other people, but they won't have to disclose it. For those following the current, scandal in Washington, General Michael Flynn did not register under FARA, but not for Russia, for the government of Turkey, which he was apparently lobbying for. And so I wondered, can you overview a little bit of how that process works in D.C. and your work?
Well, in theory, you're supposed to register and disclose some basic information, the amount you're getting paid, who you're actually signing the contract with, whether it's a government or a private company, a foreign company, or what particular ministry. And you're supposed to, every 6 months, file a report discussing your activities. And you do file the initial contract. The problem is, or the biggest problem is, that a lot of people just don't register, period. So I think there's only been one prosecution for a failure to register. I could be wrong about that, but there may not be any. So, a lot of people just ignore the rule. You lose that half right away. And then those who do file, you can figure out which lobbyists are representing, Saudi Arabia or Israel or whatever country you want to look up. There's supposed to be some detail about meetings and dates of meetings and political contributions and other information, and especially in terms of the meetings. Most lobbyists, if you look at the forms, there's no detail about who they're meeting with. So you've got an enormous percentage of lobbyists who don't register at all, and then the disclosure rules are such that there's not a lot of information provided. So most of what the lobby firms do is just, it's under the radar.
Right. And I can remember doing a report on Jamie Kirchhoff putting this really weird story out about Rudy Giuliani that made no sense, and until you realize that he was in contact with a guy who was lobbying on behalf of, it was Turkey and another state, and it was Serbia. There's a bunch of them. So and they actually, this person, to their credit, I guess, disclosed that they had been in contact with Jamie Kirchhoff. But in your case, you found, and for those who don't know, Jamie Kirchhoff is kind of a notorious neocon. He's now over at Brookings, which just shows you how far Brookings has fallen. But,
oh boy. Yeah,
he's a fellow over there. But so is Robert Kagan, so I guess they follow each other around. But one of the people you found, it was a story on Serbia, and he had been contacted by 30 Point Strategies, this guy Noam Neusner. And Noam Neusner and 30 Point Strategies, to their credit, unlike what you're talking about, had disclosed that they had contacted him about a potential story, which is how I figured it out, because how else would I have known if he hadn't disclosed it? But what you found in one of your articles that I think was a major article a lot of people have read was that there were a Georgian lobbyist was in contact with Eli Lake and Ben Smith. I'm not sure where Ben Smith was then. I know they were both colleagues at New York Sun but they were not disclosing it, right? Or give us a story there.
No. In that case, they actually did disclose it, and that's one of those very rare instances. The lobbying firm was Orion Strategies, and it was founded by some of the neocon advocates.
Oh, Goldfarb, right? That's a Goldfarb, right? One, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Exactly. Right. And Randy Scheineman, I think, is one of the founders. So they actually, I have to say, they did a pretty good job of filing, better than most firms. So that's how I found that the lobbyists for the government of Georgia had been, regularly meeting with journalists and picking up the bar tab and restaurant bills and this sort of thing. And you could sometimes sort of correspond dinners with stories coming out. There were also a bunch of junkets to Georgia, which were sort of like not exactly disclosed in the stories or disclosed very poorly. So, this is the thing. This was a case. The only reason I found it, just like your case, was that the lobby shop did disclose it. But I think that probably happens a lot more than we know. It's a rarity. I mean, if you look through those foreign agent filings, it's very unusual to get that sort of detail. And there's almost no enforcement.
Right, and that also happened with another case with Eli Lake that Glenn Greenwald wrote up, I guess, about Qatar and UAE, which are also major, spenders. I'm looking at this at the Intercept over here. Okay, so it seems like they're disclosing it. What's happening to Mike Flynn, General Flynn, is he, like I would argue, a lot of people, and it seems to be your view too, that it's actually not, it's more likely than not you're not going to register what you're doing. And that seems to be what happened with Mike Flynn. He never registered with FARA. He is now registered like a year or so after the fact, under pressure. I mean, it wasn't his idea. I wonder, for Turkey, not Russia, and I wonder if that becomes part of Russiagate or this prosecution, do you think that would change? Do you think people will start registering if Flynn gets actually tagged for acting as a foreign agent without registering?
Was there
Russia?
A flurry of people registering now?
No. Yeah. Like, he gets tagged. Like, so he's being investigated right now. And one of the things he did once he started getting investigated was he registered because he had been taking money from Turkey. I'm wondering, in your view, as someone who's covered Washington, do you think that Flynn's getting tagged for not registering and may even lead to a charge? Do you think that's scaring some of the foreign lobbyists into registering, or do you think it will have no effect?
Boy, I don't know. I mean, I think the thing now is that in addition to there was historically this lack of registration, but I think what's happened now is that a lot of lobbyists are able to skirt the law because they might be hired by a U.S. law firm, and the U.S. law firm hires them to do work, and they don't know who they're actually being paid. They may not know exactly who is paying the law firm. You see what I mean? So
right. They kind of third party it. Yeah.
Exactly. There are various cutouts. So, the thing is, I don't think that alone is going to be a huge scandal or create a huge scandal just because it's so common for lobbyists not to register. So I think it would have to go beyond that. I mean, I'm not saying he shouldn't have registered. Obviously, he should have. I mean, if he registered himself after an investigation started, that suggests he should have registered. It's just, I mean, it's not. I don't think that's a central question at the heart of the investigation.
Oh no, what I'm noticing as the Russiagate hysteria, in fairness, comes out. So everything is a major crisis. But it was funny to watch people who don't know D.C. and maybe listen to something like this that heard this, that were amazed that he wouldn't register. And so there's a disconnect, I think, between sort of Washington conventional rule breaking and people who are suddenly in a state of panic about foreign influence saying, oh, my God, this person was acting as an agent of a foreign power, and they didn't register. And, like, so I wonder if that hysteria will grab a little bit of this. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it'll have no effect.
Well, that is true. I do think, and it's sad to say, but it's so routine, that, maybe people outside of D.C. have this idea that, this is a stunning problem. But it's pretty much every day. So if the, if the Justice Department wanted to enforce the, non-registration by lobbyists, my God, you would just have like a backup, or, endless backup.
Right, and it's also big business. I remember I actually just read this, and I think Al Monitor called it first that the Podesta Group just lost the contract to represent Iraq. This is kind of the on the one hand, it seems like all these people are pretending to be about principle, but one of the things elections determine is which lobbying firms are going to get the contracts. And if Hillary Clinton had won, it'd be hard for me to imagine that the government of Iraq would have dropped the Podesta Group.
Very hard to imagine. No, lobbyists or foreign governments know clearly that under a Trump administration, as eccentric as it is, they need to have a heavier mix of Republican lobbyists. But at the same time, I would expect that the Podesta Group, well, it's just like the Clinton Foundation, obviously is going to be a lot less active, raise a lot less money. There's no point buying access if the people you're buying access with don't have power. So, the same sort of thing. But Democratic lobbyists will definitely still be required. But obviously, if you're going to lobby the White House, you've got to have a Republican lobbyist, even under Trump.
Right. Right. And it would seem, I think also what people may not know and what you've covered a lot is just how fast these, flag-waving, saluting Republican and Democratic members of Congress drop into foreign lobbying. So Saudi Arabia is one of their biggest lobbyists is Norma Coleman, right? Former senator from Minnesota.
Right.
And I was amazed to learn that, Dick Gephardt, who at least presented himself as a progressive, was one of the people lobbying for Turkey against recognizing the Armenian genocide. And so
the list goes on and on and on. Yeah, they, the old revolving door it's just such. My God, I've been writing about Washington for so long, and it's just never changes.
Well,
Every time.
Can you give your sort of general just take if someone said, "Hey, how does Washington work with this influence peddling?" Your just general take. It can be cynical if you want. It can be extremely cynical.
Well, I really think what we've witnessed is, I guess I've probably said it's never been as bad as this, 100 times or 1,000 times. But truly, I think we're watching something unfold before our eyes, which is truly alarming, which really is. The country has turned into an oligarchy in a fairly clear and obvious way. And I think in a way people are misreading the situation with Trump a little bit. There's so much, and understandably, there's so much hostility towards Trump, and more to him than to his policies, which really, really deserve serious scrutiny. But it's not just a Trump problem. We've just watched an election in which half the population votes. The amount of money pouring into the system now is just completely overrun the system. I mean, I think I've never talked to so many people, wherever you go, whoever you're talking to, nobody liked the last election. I mean, nobody liked the choices.
Right.
There was low turnout. Nobody, you voted for Hillary because you were against Trump and vice versa. So how does it's a sign of a system that is just completely broken. I mean, where you go through this enormous primaries, these primaries and caucuses, which, let's not get into all those flaws, but a system that produces two candidates who are so anathema to the majority of the American people. I mean, it's really, truly broken. And
I see it as there really was no choice. In my view, there was like no one to vote for.
There was no one to vote for. I don't even, somebody must have done the numbers, but I can't imagine the, numbers of enthusiastic voters for either candidate. I mean, it must have just been infinitesimal. But, it's a sign of the dysfunction of the system that these two candidates came out of it. And I think what's really, if you look back historically, I think we're watching the culmination of a period that started around the time of Watergate. And, it has culminated with the election of Trump, where the business class decided that, if you look at the mid-'70s, it's a period of stagflation, meaning high inflation and high unemployment, low corporate profits. And the business community decided at that point that, the old New Deal coalition was not acceptable anymore, that, wages were going to have to go down, profits were going to have to go up. It was sort of, trickle up economics, or trickle down economics, as Reagan called it. But it really started in the mid-'70s with this effort to smash the old New Deal coalition that had been pretty successful for the Democratic Party. And so we've just, this is not rocket science. I mean, you look at the economy and you look at the share of wealth going to not just the top 1%, but that infinitesimal fraction of the 1%. And clearly, there are no restrictions on there are basically no restrictions on money in politics. So, you funnel all that money upwards, and hey, for this tiny percent of the population, the system works. I mean, it's perfect. And those are the people paying the bills. Those are the people who make the campaign contributions and, write all the big checks. For them, the system isn't broken, but for everybody else it is. And, really, I think you can trace it back to the mid-'70s. And it's like there was a definite plan. This didn't just happen by accident. I mean, there was a definite plan to recapture the Democratic Party, to sort of expel the
right.
social movement. And see, here we are. It's really like just doing math. It's not really a surprise. This is exactly where, the people who have the majority of power in this country wanted things to go. They were very successful, and here we are.
Well, it was a Supreme Court justice, if I remember the history correctly here, in the 70s, the Powell memo, he became a Supreme Court justice. And what they said was, in the 70s, that it was people like Ralph Nader and these other sort of policy wonks who had kind of started, they felt, to box them in, and that if corporate America wanted to not get snuffed out, which is, an insane thing to think that corporate America actually thought it was going to get snuffed out, they need to build this sort of parallel structure and this entire funding structure. And if you read the Powell memo, you'll see what will become things like these foundations, what will become, lawsuits to increase access, so corporations can have more of a role in politics. I don't know if they thought they were going to be this successful, but they certainly proved very effective. I just wonder, in your time, is it as bad? So you're saying it's worse now than it was in the 90s, but the 90s is when the Democratic Party chucked unions. They sort of purged out a lot of the left-wing elements. and that's what Clintonism was. So was Clintonism worse than it is? I mean, or worse than? I mean, I guess. What do you think of Clintonism's effect on corruption in D.C.? That sort of third way stuff.
Or if I could just add one thing, is like, when did they stop defending the New Deal? I mean, somewhere along the line, the Democrats decided they weren't the New Deal party.
Well, I think that, there was, of course, famous formation of the Democratic Leadership Council. Yeah, I mean, there was, again, this didn't just happen. I mean, it was a plan. So the Democratic Leadership Council, the sort of corporate wing of the party, led an effort to, as I said, expel the old members of the New Deal coalition, African Americans, women, minorities, and unions, and, give much more power to the business community. So the Clintons, certainly the victory of Bill Clinton was the triumph of the Democratic Leadership Council and this corporate wing of the party. I would say it's worse just because we're now, that was, 1992. Here we are a quarter of a century later, and, the Democratic Party has been remade in that, image that was desired. It's a corporate-dominated party, and you have various Supreme Court decisions and measures that have just completely uncapped money in politics to a degree that, so anyway, this is a long and rambling way of saying, yeah, I do. I do absolutely think it's worse. The amount of money, there's no question about it. And I think we have a real disconnect with the media as well, covering this, because, the sort of high-end media is comfortable, and, that's another part of this tragedy is that, I don't ever want to be too romantic about the media, because the media is, after all, always, an elite institution. But, of course, the press did play a role in Watergate, and their, investigative reporting was seen as a really honorable tradition and profession. And, now nobody wants to do it. It's no longer considered a prestige job. The opinion, people's opinion of the media tends to be about as low as it is of politicians. And so we've got this, disconnect there too, where, there's great reporting that goes on, of course, but less and less. It's really quite shocking. To me, that's one of the more distressing parts of the story, is that there's just no longer a watchdog press.
Isn't that press essentially owned by the same people making the political donations?
Yes, it is. At least it's the same. It's all one big class. And I don't know exactly. It's hard to really trace with precision. There's so many things at play here. But the corporate media was always, there was a period where, there are cycles in in all of life and in all of history. And there have been cycles where, for whatever reason, you had very aggressive journalism. And we're just now in a phase where it's pretty dead. There's not a lot of inspiration out there. And it seems to me that the press is, extraordinarily hostile to Trump. And that's good, but it doesn't go beyond that. There's no, if Hillary Clinton had been elected, I don't think she would have received very serious scrutiny. The problem that the press has, and that the 1% has with Trump is not that he's it's that he's he's not controllable for obvious reasons. But it's not his policies that scare them so much. It's just that, he's not really a member of the club in a way, and he's not predictable at all. And so he's scary, I think, to the investor class. And not because he's out to damage their interests, but just because he's really very temperamental I don't know how to put it.
Yeah, he's unpredictable. He's destabilizing, and they're the people who own everything, so they want stability. It's funny that they all sort of kind of breathe a sigh of relief when he brought in all these Goldman Sachs people, because he was saying, well, God, at least there's some adults in the room, which is a way of saying, oh, God, at least there's some people who are stable and are going to try to control him to keep the current system running. But, yeah, I agree. This is not adversarial journalism. This is partisan journalism, and the party they represent isn't the Democrats. It's just kind of the elite. And a lot of their opinion of Trump or negative views of Trump are about cultural stuff, not really, meaning, he's not of a certain class or group, and he's offending our pieties. It's never like, wow, like the least thing they haven't. Some of the most savage stuff going on right now is ICE, the immigration stuff going on right now. They don't cover it. They don't care. They don't cover it at all. Instead, they're running factions within the CIA to smear him about Russia, which of course serves their interest of having a grand enemy to fund all these weapon systems that we don't need. So it's all like they don't care about the policies. It's all about prestige, and that's how I view it. I don't consider this an adversarial press. I consider this a sort of part. I think it's a personal hatred. They just hate him.
Yes.
They don't hate what he represents.
I agree. I mean, it's he didn't he doesn't like the media. He didn't go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which was very, very upsetting to the journalism class. And there were. I mean, the one story. There have been many of these, but the one that springs to mind was there was coverage. This was a few months ago of Trump having he liked his steak with I think it was well done with ketchup. Okay, I mean, fine, I don't eat steak that way, but that's not really getting. This was the 24-hour news cycle. So I agree with you. I mean, I think the immigration issue is really important. I'm writing something about that now, and a lot of issues.
Or healthcare. They gave him mostly a pass on healthcare. They were doing Russia stories while they were running up to their healthcare vote, and it was activists on the ground who actually, to their credit, people who work, organized, would adapt, and other groups who are not part of the Democratic Party, by the way, who were giving these members of Congress a ton of shit in their town halls and calling them, and that put pressure on them. But in that run-up to the vote, the media was essentially missing in action. Instead, they were doing every, seeming, bombshell after bombshell on Russiagate, while like $1 trillion, or I think it's a fifth or a sixth of the U.S. economy, was going to be up for a vote or getting screwed with in Congress, and the press didn't even cover it because who cares? They have health care.
Yeah, right. No question about it. I mean, Congress didn't care, that's for sure. I mean, it was the result of the outside pressure, of course. But
the wars, they become favorable to him suddenly. And only in one case that I've seen, and that's when he sent cruise missiles to Syria, right? I don't know whether it's the investor class, or maybe not all of the investor class that has the big problem with Trump. It seems to me like the intelligence community is his number one enemy, and they seem to have a huge influence over the media.
I mean, clearly there's a lot of animosity towards him from inside the intelligence community. I think it's bigger than that. I do think a lot of it is the preference for stability. This guy might do something crazy. And, and of course, the guy is widely unpopular in general. So, I don't know. I do feel like the more important issues are just not being discussed, though, and we're sitting around and, talking about, a lot of the coverage on the Russiagate story, which, there are definitely things worth looking into here, but, the amount of coverage just seems out of proportion with, given his other, his other policies and the other dangers lurking out there. It's not the media agenda I would like to see.
Yeah, and just from the other part that you've covered a lot and that I want to get to a little bit here as we're going through this is the role of think tanks in Washington, D.C., which I think they seem very, to the outside, very benign, right? Oh, it's the Center for American Progress. It's the, Foundation for a New American Security, or whatever, a project for a new American century, an American Enterprise Institute. They're very benign sounding, the Middle East Institute. But what your work's covered, and I think this is really important work. I see Low Blog do some stuff on this too, but definitely your stuff, is the role of these think tanks. Now, in fairness, I think a lot of this stuff was very useful when there were campaign restrictions. Now, with Citizens United, the leash may be so off the moneyed class that these think tanks don't matter. But for a time, certainly in the 90s and through the early aughts, funding a think tank, like, for example, the Koch brothers did with Cato Institute, American Enterprise Institute, that was a way of influencing policy indirectly under the guise of objective scholarship. So can you talk about that a little bit for people to get a handle on what the role of think tanks in Washington are?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think tanks are generally nonprofit entities, so donors don't have to be disclosed. And when think tanks choose to disclose them, they may not disclose a lot of information. So for a period, you had after Watergate, because people were so pissed, there were new rules put into place, and it took a while to subvert them. But that was also the period where, and this was the birth of the conservative think tanks, came first, was post-Watergate. And it was seen as a way to complement and get around campaign contribution limits. Not entirely, but a lot of big money has flown into these think tanks. I mean, these are really prestiged positions, and you have a revolving door there too, especially in foreign policy, between whatever administration and, these various think tanks. I found that a lot of think tanks had donor reward programs where, the more you gave, the more benefits you got. I think it was Brookings, I believe, that, various of these think tanks, the big ones, the mainstream ones, Brookings, CSIS, American Enterprise Institute, I guess, is more on the right, obviously. But a lot of the mainstream think tanks have these, membership reward programs where the more you give, the more you get. You give a certain amount of money and you can have input into actual think tank reports, or you get to attend events. It's just another part of the system that's broken. Again, it's just part of this big picture where all restrictions on money in politics have pretty much been eliminated. I don't know what's left, but so the money is, moved. It used to be traditionally you'd make campaign contributions and hire a lobbyist, and and then PR firms got bigger because they didn't have to if you're just doing PR and not lobbying, they didn't have to register, and and then all of these various Washington institutions, including think tanks, nonprofits, NGOs, got wrapped up into the political money system. So think tanks were a very important component. I think there is now a little bit more cynicism about them, but there was a period where, if you had a think tank report, that was just like the gold standard. Nobody thought about who's paying for the think tank report. And that's what made them so valuable. You didn't have to disclose the contributions, and they were thought of as being very objective. So, it's just become one more component in the lobbying arsenal.
Right. And so there was a time, there's a recent, I think maybe a year ago, story about the New York Times where they actually exposed that Citigroup was essentially, getting that little extra benefit where they were allowed to have input on writings about financial regulation, and representatives of Qatar and I can't remember the other Middle East where, they were having input. So you might be right. It does seem kind of like a shell game where they moved it around. For a while. It was a game. That's how I looked at it. That's when I would read Washington Babylon columns, and I'd go, oh, okay, this is the game, and other stuff you'd write and other people would write, and we'd move it here, right? So, you have to register as a lobbyist. They're getting a lot of scrutiny. Okay, it's a PR firm. Okay, the big one, consultant, which could mean anything.
Right.
I'm a consultant. Right. What does that mean? Now I'm a think tank. Now I'm this. But now a lot of these things are fading away, and people are losing faith in the objectivity of the institutions. But correspondingly, or maybe do you think this is the cause, there's been a parallel movement to just blow the hinges off any kind of any kind of door shutting money out. So maybe it's just basic cash for carry government now after Citizens United and a lot of these other decisions. By the way, a citizen I have to put in here when we're talking about this is the Jeff Skilling, of all people, the former CEO of Enron decision that rewrote honest services fraud, which actually sprung two people from my home state out of indictments for political corruption. Jeff Skilling, I shit you not, the guy from Enron, brought a case to the Supreme Court about honest services fraud, and they ruled for him. And now, I think Bob McDonnell was one of the beneficiaries, of Governor of Virginia, who got caught in seemingly got caught in some scandal. So, is that maybe it? Is the reason these institutions? It's not just the public losing faith, but there's no point in that playing a shell game anymore because it's kind of open corruption.
Well, I think the public has completely lost faith, clearly. And, my God, the polls for Congress are just, I think they've got to be pretty close to historic lows. I think people are just alienated and discouraged and so it just reinforces itself. But the basic problem is not that public discouragement. It's the rules just having been lifted wholesale to the point that there's just no restrictions anymore. There's really, there's just, it seems, you cannot break this monopoly system of the two parties. I don't see how, given the current situation, it's been made virtually impossible for a third party to arise. And so we're just sort of stuck in this situation. The economy, keeps getting worse. The political system is stagnant, and we have a media that does not seem all that interested in getting at the foundation of the rot. That is, focusing on Trump. And again, good. Like there should be lots of aggressive reporting, but it's a much bigger picture. It's a system we're looking at. It's not just this guy. So, if Trump resigns or gets impeached, which is, that big hope for so many people, what happens? Mike Pence or, and where's the, Democratic Party agenda to actually get people to support the party in 2018 and 2020? And it's a pretty, I'm sure I've said this in 1,000 interviews. It's a pretty bleak moment, but this one really is just, I don't know. It's hard to, it's hard not to just throw up your hands in despair.
Well, wasn't the race in Georgia with Ossoff, I think his name is, and by the way, he's at a Netroots panel talking about the 2018 elections. Let me tell you how much I want to listen to that guy. But that was a $30 million. Talk about spending projects and infrastructure. That campaign cost $30 million was spent in that race, and he lost. So you have to wonder. Yes, we are at a sort of stagnant point. Yes, we're in still water here, but the Democratic Party is kind of collapsing. And I have to think if they lose in 2018, I don't think the current regime that has fended off the people you cover at CAP, near Tandon, all these Clintonites who have seemingly, at least for a moment, fended off a Sanders insurgency, fended off left-wing attacks. If they lose again, I just wonder, and they can't really, and they've blamed Russia, which I think has helped them kind of muddy the waters on their own failures, although it's, they've really failed continually, not just in D.C., but across the country. I wonder if they lose in 2018, do you think the knives come out? What do you think you could say about the Clinton people and how, when they would come at you, and the Bill Clinton people was, yes, okay, fine, we sold out, yes, we compromised, yes, we don't believe necessarily in left social democracy, la, 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 but we won, damn it, and this is what it takes to win. Well, these people are saying all that, and they're not winning.
Yeah, that's true, and they've lost repeatedly and time again, and yet, of course, the call is still that, the Democratic Party needs to move further towards the center, which is would be funny if it weren't so sad. I mean, what you're asking is it possible for a genuine political revival where you have an outsider campaign, where the someone from the left on the Democratic Party could come up, Sanders sort of movement. And, I guess the Sanders campaign showed that it is possible because he did, come astonishingly close. That, obviously had to do with Hillary Clinton's, horrible campaign and the fact that, she was just the appalling candidate. But I don't know. I guess, glass half empty or glass half full. On the one hand, we're at such a moment where the Democratic Party is so weak that, who knows? Maybe somebody can break through. But who are we looking at this point? What's the likely insurgency going to be? And could it actually take place in the Democratic Party? I have my doubts, but I've been cynical for maybe too long. I love to believe that another a poor showing in 2018 or whatever. That just that the Trump presidency would engender a exciting political opposition, but we're just there's so few outlets. There are so few outlets. The media's would be, I think, very hostile to clearly any sort of, threat to, the media would be much more comfortable with the current Schumer-Pelosi type Democratic Party than with an insurgency. And, you just take so much money to run a campaign. But who knows? I have to say, Bernie got a lot further than I thought he would have. So I hope, I would love to see some sort of, political revolt take place in this country because we are, everyone I talk to is so down, myself included. It just, boy, you just how can things get worse? And somehow they managed to, but who knows? I don't know. I hope for once my cynicism is unwarranted.
Ken, I was curious about your writing and your research on the Clinton Foundation. I guess it was 2015 you wrote at Harpers about Shaky Foundation, and I saw some other articles where you'd gotten some pushback and there was one infusion, and I'm just curious, as of today, do you still look into that, or what are your thoughts on the Clinton Foundation? And I guess now we have an Obama Foundation has been formed, and I found it very curious, the organization in Canada that is apparently funneling money that you can't disclose in the United States, funneling it through to the mothership in the U.S. Right. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are about the Clinton Foundation now. I'm still hearing some rumblings on the right that they want an investigation of that too, so, which I don't know if that will happen or not, but I'm just very curious what your latest thoughts and research on that are.
Well, I confess that I have after Hillary Clinton lost the election, I pretty much stopped following Hillary Clinton and the foundation. I do think it was a genuine scandal, and that it's one of the main reasons I believe that she lost was that, not specifically the foundation, but that her image in general was very, the foundation was part of her image problem. It was really pretty clear what was going on there. And, just as I guess donors are not going to be donating to the foundation, I'm not really planning on writing about it much anymore. Because it's become less important, unless, God forbid, there's a Chelsea Clinton
please no,
or presidential or a new run. But I think the Obama administration will be really interesting because it's clearly modeled on the Clinton Foundation, and it's the same scheme. It's actually quite. I don't know why I'm surprised at this point after his presidency, but that he would follow the Clinton model in opening his own foundation is pretty sad.
Well, and they closed it down, right? After Clinton lost, part of the Clinton Foundation, there was this big on-runnings. Yeah. I don't want to dig too far into this because I was involved in the primaries on Bernie's side, I guess, advocacy-wise. But one of the things that we critiqued, and we were told we were crazy for even talking about the Clinton Foundation, was that, this is an influence laundering operation, right? Where people give money to the Clinton Foundation in exchange, they want access. And there were examples of that. So it wasn't, and I think you wrote about them, and all the work in Haiti where you got these telecom guys giving money and then they want something in exchange. And right after the election ended, they shut down one of the arms of it, which was, I don't know. I mean, in your view, when they shut down the Clinton Global Initiative, which is what I believe is let me see here, that the section that got shut down,
yeah.
Does that to you warrant the charge that this was a bullshit laundering? I mean, this was an influence laundering operation, not so much a charity.
Well, I mean, there's no question that, donors were giving money to buy access, and that, Bill Clinton's prominent role and the thought that Hillary was going to be president was definitely a major contributor to probably the wrong word, but a major reason that people chose to contribute to the foundation. And yeah, I mean, it was pretty obvious. Like there were definite trade-offs. There were deals that were made. I mean, it's not a secret. I mean, people were always saying, there's no perfect line, but the lines were, in multiple cases pretty close. As you mentioned in Haiti, you have Clinton Foundation donors getting big fat contracts in Haiti. Dennis O'Brien, I believe, the telecom guy, the Irish telecom guy. I mean, there were multiple. It's sort of like the way legislation gets written and all, or the way political influence is bought. It's not, usually just, here's the money and write me a bill. So the Clinton Foundation, I mean, I don't know how anybody could look at the situation there and not understand what was going on. I mean, when Hillary was Secretary of State, she would sometimes travel, and, Bill would turn up, like in Colombia, which is a place I looked at, where they said it was just a coincidence where, Bill turns up when she was there on an official visit, and he's with the biggest donor to the Clinton Foundation, who has business interest in Colombia and is involved in some Clinton Foundation projects down there. I mean, it's just it was pretty obvious. I actually thought that the foundation was a much bigger scandal than the email side, which got more of the play and, was also very interesting. And there was, I think they were both worth looking at. But I think the foundation was a far more significant problem, and it sort of, revealed the Clinton style of politics very, very clearly. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a big part of the reason she lost.
Yeah, and that does seem to be one of the things, the Clinton style, I think you hit it, which is it's not quid pro quo, it's quiddish pro quo-ish. It's sort of always a little murky. It's, there's clearly something there. I was always amazed by the pushback against that, saying it was like this great charity. And by criticizing these relationships, you're hurting children who need AIDS medication or something, which I thought was pretty ham-handed weak, to be honest. But Clinton was always more subtle. And it was that was the only real contrast I saw between the Clintons and the Trumps, is that, Trump just has no subtlety in him. I don't know.
Yeah, the Clintons are, it's always like, they've always got something going on to justify. I have heard very mixed things about the impact of the Clinton Foundation. I've heard mostly very critical things. I have had people who, contacted me after I wrote stories saying, they really did accomplish some good work. I found when I traveled to Colombia that it was very hard. I mean, in their online promotional material, it looked like, they had created all sorts of jobs for low-income people and, all the, like programs for Afro-Colombians and all of this stuff. And on the ground, all I can say is in that case, I did not see it. And, people have done similar stories. Of course, Haiti, and I've heard from people who defend the foundation that they've done good deeds. It just seems like an awful lot of money, an awful lot of overhead, an awful lot of contracts for Clinton cronies. And, if they've done some good, great. But I think bang for the buck, boy, you could have spent the money a lot better elsewhere.
And just the NGO sector, I would consider to be largely it seems like there's this push, whether it be think tanks or something else, to make things seem like they're non-political. But the NGO sector, I would absolutely consider part of politics, and that people who are involved in those things, although they may say they have these very benign humanitarian agendas, I would say, I'm not saying there's not exceptions where people who just really care. There's some good NGOs, but I would include that in the influence peddling operations, wouldn't you? People getting, no-show jobs, people getting all sorts of title bumps and things to kind of pad their resume, or someone's idiot son gets put over there because he's, screwed. I just think the NGOs are another part of the system of corruption within D.C. Do you agree?
Definitely. And and I think like think tanks, they now are attracting more attention. But yeah, they had this, aura of do-gooderism and a bright, shiny image. And I think it's a, big, rich field. So obviously, not to trash every NGO. I worked for some or done work for some, and there are good NGOs out there, but boy, talk about deserving of scrutiny. Just like the media. All the institutions that we used to think of as being on the side of the angels, those are the ones you have to look at the closest sometimes.
Well, it seems like there's credibility. Every time one of these sort of sectors or institutions loses credibility, the people who were trying to manipulate it toss it aside and say, okay, well, you trust these people, right? What's the new front? It's kind of like people are looking for fronts. They use up their credibility, they drop it, they grab another front. So it's like, okay, well,
Right. Yeah, exactly. So
I don't know if you had anything else, Joanne, but I was going to close it out by asking you to talk about your current work, what you're up to, you got a new website named, I'm guessing, after the column over at Harpers called Washington Babylon, WashingtonBabylon.com. What are you doing now? What are you looking to do in the future? Where can people find you?
In Babylon was my blog I had at Harper's, and I also co-authored a book with Alex Coburn called Washington Babylon, so I love that name. I'm working on some other projects, but definitely a going concern, and I intend to, it's sort of on, definitely a little hiatus, but I'll be getting back to it. And it's just, it's meant to be sort of a political tabloid and, covering the corruption of Washington, but also, I don't know, there's an old Hollywood scandal sheet called Confidential that back in the 40s and 50s, and it just had this, totally irreverent attitude towards Hollywood, and that's what I wanted to do with Washington Babylon. So, I started last August and got off to a really good start.
I was actually thinking L.A. Confidential when you said that, because that's what that movie's about, right? It's that style. L.A. Confidential.
Well, sort of. Confidential was you should check it out. It was just like this 40s and 50s. It was like the National Enquirer, but it was like it really went after Hollywood. And so it was sort of like, being in the belly of the beast and surviving somehow. And, it was a lot of fun. It was just a lot of fun. And, it's hard to make, especially nowadays, to make politics fun and to make people care. It's just such a...
Well, Drudge Report stole the model, right? The Drudge Report is like confidential. Maybe not confidential, but it's a tabloid.
Absolutely. Marketing-wise, it's, well done. Absolutely.
The name Washington Babylon, I like it a lot too. But I wonder, is there a short explanation for why you use that name?
Well, Hollywood Babylon was this great book by Kenneth Anger. I expect you guys are familiar with, and some of your listeners will be as well. And it's just, it's really an aesthetic thing. It's just this wonderful book, this savage take on Hollywood, these wonderful big black and white photographs. Washington Babylon was, it was a book that I co-wrote with Alex Coburn, as I said, and that, I've just always loved that title. So, and what else? Washington Babylon. I mean, what else captures Washington better than Babylon? So.
All right, Ken. Well, we really appreciate your time, and thank you so much. And find Ken's work, WashingtonBabylon.com, and at Ken Silverstein 1?
Yes.
On Twitter?
Yes.
Thanks so much, Ken.
Hey, thank you. All right. Thanks a lot.
And that's our show. I want to thank you for listening, and a special thank you to Ken Silverstein for being our guest. If you'd like to support the show, we deeply appreciate it. You can visit us at aroundtheempire.com to find our donation section, either a one-time donation at PayPal or support us on a monthly basis at patreon.com/aroundtheempire. As little as $5 a month helps us put on the show. We really appreciate it. Follow Ken's work at WashingtonBabylon.com. See him on Twitter at Ken Silverstein 1. And also follow us on Twitter at Around the Empire, or visit us on Facebook. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can find at AroundTheEmpire.com. We need 100 subscribers to get our own URL, and 1,000 subscribers that allows us to have a live chat where we can take donations. We'd really appreciate it. See you next time.
Take care, everyone.